All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our December 13th LEP2 board meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and let's go ahead and take a moment of silence to remember our fallen brothers and sisters in our professions, as well as those in the military. All right, thank you very much. We have a very lengthy agenda, and we'll go ahead and start off with item number 1, which is the approval of minutes. And just in case there's a question, we do have a quorum present, virtual as well as in person, so we're good to go with our numbers. Approval of minutes, which is item number 1, I would entertain a motion to adopt as presented.
So moved.
Motion second. Made and second to approve the minutes as presented and posted. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Minutes are adopted. All right, thank you. Item number 2 on our list is the financial audit results, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Nelson for just a little bit of background.
As you'll recall, the initiative that created the board required an annual financial audit. This year, the board contracted with the state auditor's office for that annual financial audit, and the state auditor's office is online to present the results of their audit. With that, I will turn it over to Stephanie, and you can kind of walk us through who all you have with you, Stephanie.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, my name is Stephanie Garza. I supervised the audit this year that was led by Laura. And we also have Kevin Bush on with us, who is the audit. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. Like Stephanie said, my name is Laura Shackley, and I was the audit lead of this year's audit. I just want to take a moment to thank you all for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you all for letting us speak to this audit. So before we get started, I just want to touch on audits in general here. So one of the most important things about audits is their roles to increase trust in your government. Our audits are able to do this because the public trusts the state auditor's office as an independent organization that provides transparent examinations of the operations of state and local governments. Another important role of audits is their ability to identify areas where efficiency can be improved and you can be more effective in complying with requirements. Audits can also tell you where you are already working efficiently and effectively. Our goal today will be to make sure you understand the results of your audit and answer any questions that you may have. We conducted a financial statement audit for the period of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. The objective of a financial statement audit is to issue an opinion as to whether the information included in the financial statements can be relied upon to make decisions. We are pleased to report that we are issuing an unmodified, clean audit opinion on the LEF Board's financial statements. This is the opinion you want to receive, and it provides assurance that the financial statements are stated fairly and they are materially correct. Additionally, it is important to note that our audits are conducted in accordance with government auditing standards. Those standards also require that we gain an understanding of the board's internal controls or processes that go through to prepare the financial statement for audit. Should we identify a weakness or concern with that process that could or did result in significant errors in the financial statements, we would be required to bring those to your attention and include that information in our report. We are pleased to report that we did not identify any concerns in the board's process that were required to be brought to your attention or included in our report. Lastly, audit standards also require us to consider compliance with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements where non-compliance could affect the fair presentation of the financial statements. We noted no instances of non-compliance that were material to the financial statements of the board. In our review of the LEF Board audit, we reviewed 3 main audit areas. The first was salaries and wages, in which we reviewed completeness, or in other words, were the expenses recorded in the financial statements. We also reviewed contractual services and employee training and development for classification, or were the expenses properly classified in the financial statement. Additionally, we also review the schedule of expenditures for the presentations and disclosures. Specifically, we looked at the following areas. Was the financial statement clearly and appropriately presented? Were note disclosures complete and accurate? And if significant financial events occurred, were they properly disclosed in the statement notes? In relation to our financial statement audit, professional audit standards also require that we share with you whether there are any uncorrected misstatements that remain in the audited financial statements. We are also required to note whether there were any material or large misstatements that were identified and subsequently corrected by management. We are pleased to report there were no uncorrected or material misstatements identified during the course of our audit. Now that we have shared the results of the board's fiscal year 2023 audit, we do have a couple of closing remarks to bring to your attention. First, we are pleased to report that the cost of our engagement is expected to be within the original estimate we provided. Should the board choose to contract with our office again next year, we estimate the number of hours to be similar as this year. We expect the board's report to be published on our website in the next 1 to 2 weeks. If you have not already, you can sign up to receive email notifications on when the reports are released, as well as other news, articles, and alerts, including resources our office publishes. Please note that in the past, as a courtesy, this email included a link to the report on our website and also may have attached the final report as a PDF. We have changed this practice in our continuing effort to clearly communicate with you while following cybersecurity best practices by avoiding extra links and attachments. Our new correspondence will notify you when our reports are released and provide helpful instructions on how to locate your government's audit report on our website. In addition, we will also be sending you a customer service survey. We encourage you, as well as anyone else that participated in the audit, to complete the survey as all feedback is helpful in improving our services and knowing how we can better meet your needs. Please feel free to forward the survey on to anyone that you believe might like to share feedback on our services. Before we wrap up this presentation, we would like to thank LEF management and officials for their assistance and cooperation during our audit. Specifically, we would like to extend our appreciation to Seth Flory at DES, as well as Tim Valencia and Jesse Jackson for responding to all our requests promptly. We appreciate all the time and effort you put into helping these audits run efficiently and smoothly. This concludes our presentation to the LEF board on our fiscal year 2023 audit results. We'd like to thank everyone for your time today and your participation in this meeting. At this point, we would like to open it up for any comments or questions.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Go ahead, Steve.
I'd just like to thank the team at the State Auditor's Office as well for working together with our folks over here. It was a very well-coordinated process throughout, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Steve, I noticed that in this report that she just gave, there was a comment about receiving survey information. Is that something we'll provide back? Obviously, we're happy with the results. Just curious who actually gets that. I think, Laura, you mentioned that, correct? Was it Laura?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll follow up with you guys on that.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're good. Anything else? Any other questions for Laura? It's Kevin. Kevin, can you go ahead and jump in?
Yep, absolutely. I just wanted to reiterate that this audit went very smoothly. As usual, that is what we're used to. This year was no different, and I just wanted to express my thanks for that. I know it takes time and effort on staff's part, and this audit went as smoothly as it could. So thank you to everyone involved.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to the team who worked on this. We appreciate it. Not seeing any other questions or comments. All right. Mr. Nelson, looks like item number 3.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, when the board was first created in the initiative, the responsibility for managing the LEF Plan 2 retirement fund remained with the State Investment Board, and that has proven to be a very wise decision on the part of the people of the state of Washington, and having that in the initiative. Here today to talk to the board about the work that the SIB has done managing your retirement fund is Allison Tucker, the CEO of the State Investment Board, and she'll present this year's annual report. You might remember Allison from last year when she was newer. But with that, I'll turn it over to you, Allison. Thank you.
Morning, Allison.
Good morning. Still new, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah.
For the record, I am Allison Tucker, CEO of Washington State Investment Board, and I'd like to begin by saying thank you for providing the opportunity for me to be here today to talk to you about what is new and different at the Washington State Investment Board. I think I've risen to this challenge for an organization that has not changed a lot in 42 years with a very long-term focus. It presents a challenge at times to talk about what may be different or new, but because I'm new, we're going to do a little bit of historical perspective, and hopefully I can give you some insight into what we're thinking about for the future. So there are 3 key points, though, that I'd like to say up front, as the rest of the presentation will hang on these 3 points. And they have to do with our investment performance success and Washington State's pension systems more broadly. And those 3 points are that we have very good governance at the State Investment Board. We have a consistent approach that we have used over the decades, and we have a very strong commitment to private markets. And so those are the 3 pillars of our success, we think. There are a lot of other contributing factors, but that's a big one. I'm going to pause for a moment. Are you all comfortable with the way I'm showing up in the camera there, or would you like me to adjust how I'm sitting, or does it matter? I feel like the side of my head might not be my best look. Oh, thanks. I guess I'm the one who didn't like it. Thank you. Okay.
Much better.
So, does someone have a question? No? Okay. Thanks for tolerating that. I might be too comfortable in this room. So I've been at the WSIB for 14 years. Some of you know that. Some of you may not. I've been in this role. I'm just finishing out my 2nd year as the CEO. And prior to CEO, I spent 2 years as our chief investment officer. So just finishing 4 years of executive leadership here. I have replaced our long-term CEO, Teresa Whitmarsh. So like other state agencies and the nation is going through a bit of a transition with retirements and other changes. We have been in a period of transition for a number of years, not just at the executive level, but all throughout the organization. And I just want to assure you that we think we're navigating the situation well. And I'll show you some of the changes that have taken place. But I'm pleased to report that we seem to be handling it pretty well. I just said I wanted to leave, and that's not what I want to do. So I might need some help. Let's see. Here we go. Got it. Thank you. So on this slide, when I stepped into the leadership role, we also welcomed several new members to the executive management team. And so we thought that was good timing to take a deep dive in the organization and spend considerable time and resources to go on a journey to define our vision, our mission, and our values. And so we are very proud of the fact that we enlisted the entire agency to come up with these things you see on the page here. I'm going to start in the middle, which is our mission and what you're probably most interested in. And it has not changed. The mission has not changed since our founding in 1981. And that is given to us by the legislature, which is asking us to invest with integrity, care, and skill to maximize return over the long term at a prudent level of risk for the exclusive benefit of beneficiaries. And we tried hard to not use the word BENA twice in 3 words there, but we couldn't get around it. Benefit of beneficiaries, that's our fiduciary duty. That hasn't changed. Vision, though, is a little different. That is our view for where we expect to be in the future. And so just to comment on that, we're already well known as a leading institutional investor in the country. So we're just saying we'd like to keep it that way. We value diversity of perspectives, even though our mission is focused on investing. We can't do that with the operational excellence that's required of every single member of the team at WSIB. And we definitely take our duty as public servants extremely seriously. We have 7 core values. They're listed there. They have definitions. I'm not going to walk through all of that with you. I will highlight integrity and patience. Those are the first 2 you see on the chart. And if you don't take anything else away, take those 2 things. We have a huge pool of assets for the state that are entrusted to us. Can't do that without the highest levels of integrity. And we have to be patient. We have to use process and prudence and all of those things. So those are the 2 that I would highlight for you. Moving on to one of our core strategic advantages, which is our governance structure. So this structure was established in 1981, and we've talked about the founding statutes a few times already in this meeting. The top 2 bars are our voting members of the board. The bottom bar are our non-voting members, the financial experts that are appointed by board members. Top bar represents the ex officio members and legislators. I think of them rightly or wrongly as state representatives. And then the 5 below that are the beneficiary representatives on our board. Greg Markley, who I'm assuming you all know Greg.
Too well.
Yeah, okay, too well. I won't tell him you said that. He's our new chair, our newest chair. He just recently took over from Tracy Guerin. He's a firefighter, and he served as our vice chair over the last couple of years. And Yona Mikowski is our new vice chair. She's been on our board for 6 years. Governor Inslee has been in office for a long time, and anyway. But we're expecting that role to turn over, obviously, as he's not running for another term. And so Joel Sachs, who is the current head of L&I, has been with us for 11 years. He's our longest serving board member. Bottom line here is that this setup, and I like to talk about it because of my newness in the role, and I don't take it for granted, even though it's been around for a long time. This setup seems to work exceptionally well for Washington. You definitely don't have to take my word for it. You can talk to our board members. When we go around the country and visit with other pension systems, whether it's in an annual meeting format or visiting them one-on-one, we're always asked, how are you all doing this at Washington State? And I think this idea of having the ex officio members alongside beneficiaries, and I'll just mention at that time, I heard this earlier today here in this meeting, at that time of the founding of the legislation, it pooled all of the pension systems together here in Washington. So we don't have all these different groups. And that has given us a tremendous advantage in scale over the years, which I'll talk about more in a minute. So that's how we're run. I know you're familiar with that, but I think a reminder is always a good idea. On this slide, there's just a couple points here to understand. We have a huge pool of trust assets. I mentioned the scale already. It gives us a cost advantage, and we have a long-term focus. We're invested all over the globe and across every major asset class. And we do all of this from Olympia and Seattle. So you can see in the middle section there where the investments reside, 93 countries, most of the continents, 17,000 holdings. But we're small in staffing, 113 people, most of them here and a few up in our satellite office in Seattle. And I have the pleasure to be here today. I want you to know there are 112 other very hardworking people here. They're super committed. They go above and beyond in their jobs all the time. So I want to highlight that for you. This is a slide that shows the makeup of all of the funds that are currently under our management. You can see that's a lot. It hasn't changed much from last year. There might be one small change there, but that could have been the year before. So I'll just say it's virtually unchanged. Under the retirement fund section, that's the scale I've been referring to. A lot of assets there that we can commingle and use for cost-effective execution. I've presented this slide to you 2 years ago, and I think my whole comment was, here's a slide with some numbers on it. On your next slide. So I'm going to pause longer on it because your assets are, this is the most current markup as of September 3rd, $6.7 billion in Plan 1, $20.3 billion in Plan 2. I don't know if this is of interest to you or not. I thought it was sort of interesting that the size of the teachers' retirement system Plan 1, this is assets, not liabilities, about $7 billion is roughly the same size as the left Plan 1. That hasn't always been the case. There's been an awful lot of funding that has gone into the legacy Plans 1, and I'm referring specifically to PERS 1 and TERS 1. I can use those acronyms. Yes, we know what those are. Okay. Next page. This is getting into what is it that we do? How do we manage these assets for you? These are 5 asset class. That's what you're looking at here. These are the 5 asset classes utilized for management of the commingled trust fund. So all of the pension systems where the left 2 assets are in that program. So the way to read this chart is that on the left-hand side, you have public equity and fixed income, also referred to as stocks and bonds. These are publicly traded traditional securities or instruments. They have a high level of liquidity. And when I say liquidity, I'm referring specifically to the ability to transition from a security to cash. So we can transact very quickly on public equity and fixed income to convert to cash if we needed it. On the right-hand side, these private equity, real estate, and tangible assets, these are what are historically referred to as alternative asset classes, although these 3 asset classes are so widespread in the institutional investment community, I have the feeling that label is going to go away over time, but for now, traditional on the left, alternative on the right. Our private equity and real estate programs, the key distinction here is that they cannot be converted into cash readily. It takes time for us to do that. Private equity and real estate, those programs are very mature. They've taken us over 20 years to build. Tangible assets is nearing maturity. We've been building it out for the last 10 years. It's approaching, but not nearly as large nor as mature as the other 2. And I'll show you the performance by asset class on another slide here. What the board recognized in this setup a long time ago is that if you don't have huge cash flow barriers, that is, you don't have a strong need to have to sell assets to be able to provide cash, say in the form of benefit payments, for example, as a percentage of the fund, you can take this captive, scalable pool of assets and invest in these less liquid areas that tend to have higher returns than their public counterparts. And you don't have to worry about the lack of liquidity. So that was the thinking. That's a very simplified way of explaining 20 years of work to get these programs to where they are. But we are in a very favorable cash flow situation compared to other pension systems, which is what can support a higher allocation to private markets than our peers. We're about double the percentage of private markets to an average pension system.
Allison, can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
On the real estate portion
Yes.
right there, is it property that you actually, I know you hold, but do you occupy it in some cases, or is it property that you lease out? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, we are. So for us to occupy it, you would mean WSIB employees.
Or other state groups.
Yeah, no, it is all market driven. So we own the real estate and lease it out for its to the pub. I'm saying public. No, it's not. It's not for use by the state necessarily or by us. We are invested very lightly in office building, which would be the people that would take up, those leases. It is tends to be focused on things like self-storage, distribution center for facilitating logistics around e-commerce. Do we still call it that? Internet shopping. residential. Yeah, residential. Thank you, Tor. I was about to call in. You don't know why I'm escaping the headlines there. So we invest. The structure of that is that we own companies that are in the business of either building or maintaining these properties and operating them as well. Okay, you're welcome. This chart is a very simplified explanation of risk in investments and using the 5 asset classes that are the core of the investment program for the CTF. So very simply, fixed income is the lowest risk and lowest returning asset class that we invest in, all the way through to private equity, which is the highest risk. So the main points here are that we manage risk at the asset class level. So using real estate as an example, we build a portfolio construction that has a lot of the different features you see listed there. The right-hand side, levered, emerging markets, raw land, those are examples of riskier real estate propositions relative to the other side, which is less leverage, in fully developed markets, and you buy something that already exists and is leased out, for example, when you buy it. That's less risky than building something or owning raw land. So the real estate portfolio itself manages its risk, and then at the total portfolio level, we manage risk by combining these 5 asset classes in such a way that we believe optimizes the return we're being asked to deliver for a prudent level of risk. It is meant to withstand a variety of different environments. So how have we done? I think you know that we've done well. Not every year, but over the long term. So I'm actually going to touch on all 4 squares in this graph because they tell a very important part of a different angle of our story here. So in the upper left-hand side, this is the historical market value. This is a fiscal year mark, and so that's what you'll see in annual reports, what the state actuary uses, et cetera. And we are a net outflow pension system. All combined, we give out more in pensions than we bring in contributions. We are our net cash outflow is at a very low level relative to other. I think the average in the United States is about 4% annual cash outflow. We're about 1%, just to put some numbers on it. So when these bars grow, it's a result of investment return, because they would be shrinking otherwise, if that makes sense. Right next to it are the historical fund returns on an annual basis. So each 1-year return is listed for 10 years. You'll see that some years are very, very good. Other years are not as good. But on this slide, this 10-year period has not a single 1-year negative number. That's pretty unusual. I just want to make sure you know, sometimes we have a negative year. You would have lived through some of those periods before. That does happen. Markets are volatile. But over the last 10 years, that has not been the case. Going down to the left-hand side, this is our asset allocation. So the inner circle are those 5 asset classes and their target allocation. The outer circle is what was actually allocated to those asset classes as of, I think this one's as of September, it is as of September 30th. So we've moved the bottom sections, we've moved forward 3 months in time here. That's just to be current, and above is to be consistent with what you'll see in official end of year reporting. So we're a little overweight the private markets, again, private equity, real estate, and tangible assets. Those aren't things that we can immediately turn around and say, get back to targets. But I want you to know we are in conversations with our board and internally to figure out what are the steps, if any, we should take in managing these programs to make sure we don't become too far overweight the private markets. And the right-hand side is our historical performance. Bottom right-hand side, I'd ask you to focus on the total CTF. It's, I guess, that grayish brown color near the top. And if you go all the way over to the right, and you'll see that there's an 8-point Does that say 8.8%? Yes, it does. Return on our assets, that's on average every year for the last 20 years. If you go down that column, you'll see the real estate annualized average return at 11.5% and private equity at 14%. Private equity, in our view, has to beat the public equity return by a significant margin to be worth the higher risk that comes with that asset class. And as you can see, it has handily done that over the years for us. And that has to do with a lot of factors. One is we're well known in this area. We have the ability to select from very high quality managers to invest on our behalf. In the 1 year column, this is a little bit unusual. It's a lot unusual. This is a lot unusual. So I'm going to point it out. And that's that the cash return was 4.9% down there at the bottom. If you compare that to the private equity return of 4.8 and the real estate of 3.6, it's pretty unusual, and even fixed income at 3.7, that our cash holdings would outperform these asset classes. That is, of course, because of the rapid rise in interest rates driving higher cash returns, and those rates have since stabilized. So we continue to look at what, if anything, should we do differently given this new regime and rates and inflation. And so far, we are still doing that work, have not recommended any major changes to the portfolio. This slide you've seen before many times. I'm gonna give it a little different spin this year, and that's just to say that we continue to be well regarded. I think I've front ran this slide earlier. I put Washington's and WSIB's results because we are just one leg of this stool. You absolutely need us to perform to get this funded status, but you also need to pay for the benefits that are promised, which the legislature has been doing. And I'm always nervous to say this, but what I believe is true, that we have a modest benefit program here in Washington State relative to other pension systems. So those three things have contributed to this huge success. That we had pension reform in 1977 and others are just going through that now, suggests that that we were way ahead on those things, and it really matters for what we do. I wanted to point out that when it comes specifically to the State Investment Board, we have our costs analyzed every year and presented to the board, so they get an outside look at, not from us, that compares us to our peers. And I would like to share with you two highlights from that report, which was just presented at the last board meeting in November. We have WSIB as one of the highest returns for cost in the country over the past 5 years. We've added over 3% in excess returns over the median pension fund. So if you had hired one of these other states, which amounts to $20 billion in real dollars that have not needed to be collected through higher contribution rates. So that's money, as we think about it, that frees up the state to implement policy decisions of their choice, right, to the tune of $20 billion. And over the past 25 years, we've added 1.2% in excess returns every single year over the median pension fund, which by their measurement came out to $32.5 billion that was contributed to the state's efforts through what would otherwise be higher contribution rates. So, in a nutshell, given our heavy allocations to private markets, we are more expensive than other pension plans on an absolute basis. But what you can remind yourself of when you hear that criticism is that for the value added, we have all been compensated for that risk and that cost in a prudent way, and it has been successful for us over time. Okay. So it's always good, I think, if you'll let me to say that was looking backward, and we can't guarantee, we don't guarantee. Thank you, Tor, for being here. Well, I say the word guarantee. We can't guarantee that we can do that going forward. In fact, we would like you all to know it's not very likely that we can perform. We're not going to get another 28% year, for example. and you wouldn't expect us to. We're aiming to hit the actuarial return assignment, right, which is obviously a lot lower than 28. We have a new regime in markets. These are the key risks that we see. We call them threats, the key threats to our success, and what you'd expect us to be focused on. We've had a lot of staff turnover. It's not all bad. People retire. Some people are getting some great job offers, and we're happy to see them be successful in their careers and make a lot more money. That's a positive thing. However, it creates transition risk at our organization that we need to deal with. I do want to share with you, because I'm so proud of it, we had a 94% response rate to our most recent engagement survey that the state puts out, which is really high. I mean, they have 94%, and there was no incentive offered. They did that because we asked them to. And the engagement scores on every single factor were higher than they were in the last measurement, and some of them by a huge leap. And I would say that the one measure I think is indicative is that 99% of our employees felt that their supervisor treats them with dignity and respect. So we think that goes a long way toward keeping up the excellence that people have come to expect from us. We do have risk in transition. However, we also have these other factors at play, which like high engagement scores. Market conditions, we're in a regime change. I've already mentioned that we're looking at ways that we need to think about changing the portfolio over time to engage in this new world. So you'll see a lot of education sessions coming next year with the board. And external interest. So we've had a big increase now in external interest in what we do. And nationwide, there's a huge amount of external pressure being applied to pension systems in a way that, you know, if you look back since pensions were invented, I'm sure there have been cycles where this has happened before, but for most of us in our careers right now, this is new. And so we'll be focused at the State Investment Board on making sure we have a lot of information out there, a lot of transparency, a lot of some proactive engaging with stakeholders. You might see me again if you'll have me. We'll see. Making sure everybody's well informed about what we're trying to do. Yes.
Hi, Allison.
Hi.
Hey, a quick question on ESG. Can you touch? I've, like yourself, I've come up to speed quite a bit. A few trainings I've gone to, and it is something that is significant. And can you touch just real quick on how that affects investments as far as the ability, what possibly have been invested in the past and maybe may not be invested in the future?
So the way we think about, thank you for that question. External interest tends to be around ESG. So it's perfect segue. And I may have I think I do have a slide on this, but I'll just address it now. When you do diligence to decide what's an appropriate investment for the State Investment Board, we're looking at every factor we can come up with, right, to decide is this appropriate or not. And for a long time, we have been aware that good governance, of course, that's the G in ESG. I know that's not really what you're asking me about, but let me just briefly say good governance is so critical to the success of an investment, right? So that area has been well accepted for years and years. And then as we became better and better educated in the climate crisis, I don't know what the right term for climate transition, climate crisis, climate change, pick your term, as we're seeing the physical impacts increase and we're seeing scientists get better and better at projecting what the future could look like under a variety of scenarios. We realized we need to protect for current physical risk, and we need to be thinking about future scenarios that are wide ranging, from flooding to migration, right? Like climate migration 100 years from now. We have a 15-year time horizon, and that's the challenge. So not everything is immediate this year, but because we know we're investing in perpetuity, we want to make sure we bring that long-term focus, and we use the lens of sustainability to do that. So is this a sustainable investment? Do we see the factors in place that make this possible for the future without, this is so important, without assuming a future, We don't land on a specific scenario. We try to stay open to multiple scenarios that could play out because of policy response, because of the science that might give us new information, because of the technologies that are changing, right? And so what we want to do is make sure we are investing with all the best information we can gather around climate, for example. DEI is another important area for the board. That's an S factor. So we've got the E being climate, the S being for our board, diversity, especially historically women represented in decision-making entities. Now it's much broader than just women, broader than women. So all that is to say, our focus is what's good in the long term. How do we think things are playing out? Do we have good information? And is it material to the investment program? If it's material over our time horizon, we need to be incorporating it. So we have launched a major effort internally. All this work, by the way, really started in earnest in 2014. So we're coming up in our 10th year here. But it's such a changing environment. We have to keep at it hard. This year, we started a major effort to educate our investment staff to be more formal in how we're incorporating the E and the S consistently across the portfolio in our due diligence of managers. There is no short answer for this question, as you're probably gathering. That's me seeing me tackle this question a few times. That is me at my concise best. Could I help clarify any piece of that better?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
I know it's a big topic. Anything else on that? Okay. We are working to be more concise. That is a major goal for 2024. That's part of the stakeholder engagement. So we can just say, this is what we're doing. What we believe you'll find at the end of the day, whatever that is, looking forward, let me use a different expression. 5 years on, 10 years on, I think what you'll find is that we will have equipped this agency very well to handle this and to navigate through this transition. Right now, we're doing a lot of work. It's hard to pinpoint the headlines you might like to extract, but I think looking back, you'll see, a lot of work was there. I expect us to be ahead of our peers by the time we're finished with all of the education and implementation. Okay. I'm just going to try to give back some time if I can. These are factors. I like to remind you that this small box on the right, that's what the WSIB controls. And there's a lot there. I'm not saying it's not a huge amount. We do control a lot, but there's also many factors we don't control. I would highlight that the number of FTEs and the salary allocation from the legislature, they have been very good to us since I've been CEO. And so we have been able to alleviate a little bit of the compensation pressure we were facing. And we've received FTEs that we have asked for, and that's been extremely helpful. Okay, so here you go. These are the key initiatives. I think I've touched on all of them already. I'll just say that climate and DEI and ESG, that's a major focus for us, and we're going to continue to work to be as transparent as we can be so that people understand what we're doing in an area where there is so much nuance and political attention, and it's particularly in other states, that we just want to make sure people are clear. I do talk a lot to legislative leadership on these topics, and so far the feedback I'm getting is people are appreciative of our approach. I think I'm not speaking for anybody out of turn there, so we just want to keep it that way. And then let's see, wrapping up. I think I've made these points already, so I'll just wrap it up by saying our mission has not changed. We work hard, all of us, and are dedicated to making sure that we are navigating the enormous transition going on in the world and our agency as best we can. And so far, I think we're doing well with that. That concludes my prepared remarks.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Jay, go ahead.
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate the presentation and all the work that you guys do. It's very impressive. When you show the map about being top funded, right, and top performing, that's meaningful for us and all the members that we serve here. So just wanted to express my appreciation. The one question I had is your key initiative slide.
Yep.
You talked about DEI.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, how does that show up in the work that you do? Is it around kind of the work that you're doing as a staff? Or does it show up in how you choose your, the investments? And maybe you could just talk briefly about that.
Yes, it shows up it shows up in three main areas. It shows up in our agency, it shows up in our management of our portfolio, and it shows up in the work we do collaborating with other pension funds and institutional investors on big platforms. And so that we have an investment belief that says when diverse perspectives are incorporated into and equitable treatment for workers is incorporated into a business, economic outcomes can be improved. So that's really it. And if that's the case, we want to make sure that the investments that we're making are taking advantage of that improved economic outcome available by adding diversity to decision making. We all know that this is the nuance of these things. There's no single thing. You can't point to this one factor and say, because we have this, we're going to be successful. You have to have a lot of things to make a successful organization, right? It's hard. We think it's hard to do it without diversity, though. And so that's one of those things we look for. We do, and we look for other things, right? And so it's part of the calculus that goes into making an investment decision. I forgot that other point I was going to make. So, but historically, we've been focused on making sure women were represented. I know what I was going to say. In the financial industry, there is improving but very poor diverse representation. And so I'm glad to see the numbers are improving, but we will continue to advocate for more diversity across the industry.
Thank you. I just appreciate the focus there.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Steve.
Many of you will remember when the Left 2 board actually had some small offices in this very building. So going back to the creation of the board, SIB has not only done an extraordinary job managing the $20 billion in the pension fund, but they have been very generous and fair agency partners with us. That has continued, even though we're no longer in the building. And Allison, I want to say thank you to you and your team for everything that you've done to help us out as an agency do our job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that comment.
Other comments? Hasini? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Mr. Nelson, item number 4. Looks like we're going to go to Jacob. Firefighter definition.
Yes, this is an issue that the board has been working on all interim long. You moved it to a final presentation for this meeting, and here to deliver that final presentation is Jacob. And with that, well, I'll give you a chance to get set up there, Jacob.
This is the one time he's brief with his comments.
Yes. No. Don't.
Mike was on.
Yeah. Don't give me a chance to. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, inside.
All right. But that's how this item came to be on today's agenda. And with that, Jacob, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm clearly getting too comfortable. Okay, the issue in front of the board today is that some promotional positions within a fire department may be considered PERS positions by the Department of Retirement Systems, which may limit employers' ability to fill those positions. And I should add that this issue, we've talked about this in the past, but this issue has been building in part due to the changes in the size and structure of fire departments around the state, in particular from regional fire authorities being created, being larger employers with different positions than have traditionally been at most fire departments. So just a history of how we got here. This issue wasn't a bill last session. It passed through Senate Ways and Means, but did not pass out of the legislature. The board received an initial briefing in June and then a comprehensive briefing in November, where the board made a motion to request a final briefing. Won't read that whole thing to you, but there's the very specific definition, and it's a little long and specific because this did also come out of attempted rulemaking that the board staff did with DRS, and wanting to drill down and be very specific on ensuring that the concerns were addressed, but it was not too broad where it brought in other positions that were unintended. So some types of positions that are of concern. So these positions would have to be limited within that definition that are within a fire department and do not supervise firefighters. Currently, there is a catch-all for anyone who supervises firefighters in a fire department that they are automatically in LEF, as long as they're full-time and fully compensated. However, the positions within the fire department that have job duties that require experience as a firefighter to perform the essential functions of those positions. And so some possible examples that could happen that would fall under this category are firefighter trainers, and that would be full-time firefighter trainers that at large employers that are just turning out new class after new class. And they, as part of their job, they do not actually go out and respond to calls. And that's significant because the current WAC definition or rule definition at DRS, what DRS looks for is, do you respond to calls? And not so much do you actually go out, but is it at least in your job description that you may be called upon to respond to calls? And then that meaning that you have the proper gear and the proper training up to date to do that. And then also another example would be management positions. So I was talking about these larger fire departments, regional fire authorities, and that there may be a need for positions that do not actually go out and fight fires, but that would benefit greatly from an experienced firefighter and may be a promotional opportunity for a firefighter working their way up through management to be in charge of something like logistics, purchasing fire equipment, supplies, where you could imagine that the employer would want an experienced firefighter in that position, but would not want that firefighter to have to choose between taking that promotion and losing their LEF membership while in it. So we did request analysis from OSA, shared a bill draft with them that's in your materials, and requested analysis. Their response is also in your materials. The costs they found would be indeterminate due to a lack of data on what members would be impacted, which is what we expected. In this one, we can't provide, wouldn't be able to provide a full analysis of all the job descriptions in the state and to identify who would be impacted. And then they did provide some information within that analysis, though, and they did a fiscal note last year when the very similar language bill passed out of Ways and Means, where they identified some things they would look for that could cause an impact or not. I did want to add also. Shared the bill draft and have had discussions ongoing for the last couple of years with DRS on this. And another just potential issue to be aware of is it's possible, we're not aware of any, but it's possible that there could be someone who is a LEF 2 retiree who is working in a fire department in a PERS position, that if a bill like this were to pass, they may be moved into LEF and no longer be able to be a career choice LEF 2 retiree. But we're not, it's just a possibility. We're not aware of anyone who would fall into that category. So in front of the board today, the next steps, option 1 would be to motion to endorse legislation based on the bill draft that's been provided. And then option 2 would be to take no action today. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jacob, on the motion to endorse legislation, would it be retroactive to some date? So, or does it take effect from the time the bill is adopted? So those that maybe have been in these positions for 10 years, let's say.
Yeah.
So how does that affect them?
So it would be prospective. So pension legislation is always prospective unless we specifically say it's retroactive. And so this bill draft does not have any retroactive language in it. So
Okay.
yeah, and I would add, there's only one person that kind of kicked off some of this discussion that we're aware of that may be impacted by it, but it was, I think, more born out of just a concern of as these larger fire departments are created, that there may be more of these in the future. We're not aware of a group of people who would be impacted by it.
Representative Berquist.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So generally speaking, current practice is maybe if you're a full-time trainer, you're still also issue gear and could act in a fire service opportunity if necessary, and that kind of gets you into left 2 qualifications, or how does it sounds like that's how it works, but in this one case it's not working out that way? Or
yeah, so the one piece was not a trainer, it was more of a management position, and there were some more complications with that position where it was a fire department, became a regional fire authority, and just what the person did changed over time. But my understanding with the concern of employers, and this went back to a conversation before my time, was that they were having to spend money. So on those trainers, maybe they don't intend for them to ever go out and fight a fire or these management positions, but they have to pay to keep them to have their gear, to have up-to-date mask fit test was one of the things that kept coming up, but that they have to jump through those hoops in order to keep the person in the left. But I don't know if any of the firefighters could speak more specifically to what's going on with trainers at employers. But yeah, my understanding is now they would have to, in their job description, say that they may go out and fight fires, and the employer would have to keep all of their gear up to date and their testing up to date.
Steve, I think you're saying something.
That's the workaround that's out there now, is they'll put something in their job description that says they might have to fight a fire, even if there's no expectation, especially like for some of the management positions, that would ever happen. And then they have to get the gear and manage that as well.
Other questions? All right, so before us, we have 2 options, number 1 or number 2.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion for option number 1 to endorse legislation.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded to endorse legislation. Comments, questions on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, it's adopted. Thank you. Jacob, number 5. Steve, you got it.
Just again, this was on the board's work plan. It got added during the course of the year as we became aware that there were surviving spouses of duty-related or what could be considered duty-related deaths who were not receiving benefits because their claims had exceeded a statute of limitations at L&I that the board was not aware of, we were not aware of as staff. And then as a result, as we learn more about this issue, not only were they being denied that special death benefit, but once that benefit was denied, then DRS would deny all the other duty-related death benefits that are in statute for families. And with that, I will turn it over to Jacob.
Thank you. So the issue in front of the board today, left Plan 2 beneficiaries have been denied a one-time special death benefit because they missed the L&I deadline for application, which is typically 1 year from the time of death. As Steve just said, that was the initial issue statement, and it has broadened as we've learned more about this issue to include other benefits, which I will get into here later. I did want to respond. I couldn't remember which board member asked this question last meeting, but there was a question about which employers these issues were coming up from, and if maybe it had been, some employers, a larger employer perhaps that had a larger HR department or whatever, was communicating about this benefit, or just kind of how it could fall through the cracks, letting people know about this benefit and the deadline. And so the employers were Pierce County Fire Department, City of Seattle Fire, and City of Hoquiam. So the issue history of how we got here, brought to the board's attention by impacted beneficiaries. I did want to just give a shout out to Tammy and the Ombuds office. This is another, I think when we think of the Ombuds office, we think more of her helping people through these benefits. But also it's a great place for us to be able to identify policy issues and bring those to the board. And so that was one of the places that this was brought to our attention. And then also brought to the board's attention by some stakeholder representatives. And so the board received an initial briefing in July, and then the comprehensive briefing last month. And there was the motion, you can see there below, for final briefing on this policy option that would shift the determination of the benefit eligibility from L&I to DRS. So in part that the statute of limitations would apply, and then also because DRS is the plan administrator for the other pension benefits, they would also be the plan administrator for this benefit. And then that this would apply retroactively to beneficiaries that have been denied special death benefits for not meeting the statute of limitations. And so that would take care of the specific individuals that were brought to our attention over the last few months. So some of the other benefits that were impacted by this. So there was that initial denial by L&I, and then if you were denied that, then DRS used that denial to also not give you the option for an unreduced survivor pension benefit. You were not eligible for the benefit enhancement minimum lump sum payment of $20,000. So that was with the benefit enhancement, if there was a duty-related death, the board set a minimum payment of $20,000, not dependent on service credit years, like for everyone else. And then also access to PEB health insurance with the premium reimbursement. So those were all ones that we know that some of these three individuals were impacted with. And then another one that also came up, but no one as of yet has been impacted by it that we're aware of, is tuition reimbursement. Yeah, people would be eligible for that, and that determination is made by the public colleges in the state. So we're not sure how exactly, but I think it's likely they would use the L&I determination as well. And I want to thank OSA. I think, we pick on OSA about, doing math for us and being math nerds, but they know our systems really well. And when they're doing that math, they go through everything with a fine tooth comb, and and Mitch in particular on this one, helped bring these to our attention, that these other benefits may be impacted. And then we worked with him and DRS to verify that they were being impacted. So I shared this before, but just some of the data from DRS. Like I said, there was 3 that were denied for timeliness. This has all been recent. So even though those benefits existed for years, going back to the 90s, it's just been in the last year that there's been 3 denials for timeliness. One of those that I spoke to you about last time and shared some more information about has been overturned by the Board of Industrial Appeals, which reviews the appeals review of L&I decisions. But there are still 2 out there, which I'm going to provide a small update on later in this presentation. And so OSA used that data and then worked closely with DRS to do a pricing for the board. And so here you can see the numbers on that. And the thing I want to just draw your attention to is that the rate impact is less than 1 basis point. And so there would be no supplemental rate impact as a result of this of the legislation. Okay, so this is a very blank slide because this has been up to literally 5:30 last night was the last update I got. So we've been continuing to work with DRS and LNI on reviewing the proposed bill language and attempting to resolve those 2 existing cases that were denied by LNI. LNI has been great to work with. They reviewed had a couple meetings with me and Steve, and have provided feedback on the bill draft and have let us know that they are good with continuing to review these for the determination to be made with LNI, but the board carving out an exception to the statute of limitations so that LNI could continue to do this work, but they would not be against the law being amended to clearly state that the statute of limitations would not apply for this specific determination. So it would not apply to the LNI benefits that are separate, but LNI could continue to do this determination. There was some concern about LNI doing their own determination and then DRS doing a different determination, and those being different than each other. They felt it made sense for them to continue to do both. And then also, as we've continued to share the bill draft with DRS, and they've worked through how they would administer this. I don't think I've got a definitive answer, but that they are exploring with LNI that if a bill did pass that made DRS responsible for making the determination, that they may just contract that back out with LNI to make the determination, but not apply the statute of limitations. Let me just look ahead real quick. Yeah, so on the next slide, there'll be next steps and options. And so one of those options is going to be to keep it with LNI, but have no statute of limitations apply to it. So they still make that determination. And then the other one would be what the board first looked at, which is DRS is responsible for it. But now we know DRS would likely just contract that back to LNI, which just adds complication. And then also just wanted to add on the 2 cases that still are out there, LNI is continuing to look to determine if they can resolve those. They were hoping to do so before today's meeting, but were unable to. So waiting for more feedback on that. The bill draft did include a retroactive section. And so if LNI is able to overturn their initial decision, then that retroactive section would no longer be necessary. It could be removed from the legislation. Yeah. So I guess any questions about where we're at on LNI? I hope that kind of made sense.
Questions? Just make sure I understand this. So conversations between LNI and DRS gone well, right?
Yes.
And then that's going to be part of our options is that I think you just spelled it out, is that one of them, instead of having DRS make a decision and then contract it out. Okay,
yes.
Make sure I understand that. All right.
Yes, that's correct. So that's, how that would end up working out, which now I've got the options in front of you, but option 1 would be with the board motion to get a briefing on today at the last meeting, would be to shift that determination of the eligibility from LNI to DRS. Now we know DRS would do an interagency agreement or contract back to LNI that determination. And then option 2 would be to remove the LNI statute of limitations for the left two death benefits, but keep the determination of eligibility with L&I. And so in that bill draft, we don't mess around with the L&I statute. It's just all within the left two statute that we're making those amendments to ensure that we're not accidentally impacting the separate L&I benefits. In discussions with L&I, we were making that clear that we were just looking at the benefits that are paid out of the left two trust fund, not benefits paid out of L&I. Which can get confusing because they have a pension benefit also. So, using the word pension can get confusing. But yeah, we're able to talk to them about that and confirm that they would not be against that bill, and in fact helped us with drafting it.
Jay, go ahead.
I just want to say I appreciate this issue being brought to the board's attention and for an ability to act on it. I think for me, the problem with statutes like this is they assume that surviving family members all understand the benefits that are due. And that's just a big mistake to make those assumptions. And then to find out later that you were due a benefit, but just because you found out too late, you don't get it. It's just more trauma on top of trauma they've already experienced. So I appreciate this. When it comes to looking at one of these options, I mean, I'm leaning towards option one, but I'm interested in kind of where everyone else is on this one. At the end of the day, I think they both solve a problem, but I'm trying to understand why one might be better than the other.
Well, if I could speak to that, I would say up until the last month, we thought as staff, we thought option one would be the solution that would be cleanest with L&I and with DRS, because we were super concerned about unintentional consequences with anything in L&I. However, in the last month, working with L&I and DRS, they believe that option two is actually better because the benefit itself, although L&I is applying this statute of limitations, the benefit itself is in Title 41, which is a pension statute. So by making a fairly clean amendment in Title 41, they felt that got rid of the statute of limitations issue for their determinations, does not impact anything in the L&I statutes. They worked very cooperatively with Jacob as far as reviewing and suggesting changes in bill drafts. So I would say from a staff perspective, we've kind of done a 180 where now the option two seems to be the cleanest for all the agencies involved. And as Jacob mentioned, it's got a retroactive piece in there that may or may not be necessary, but it's in there since we've still got at least a couple of family members out there, widow, orphan, that have been denied benefits because of the deadline. Jacob, does that fairly summarize your?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't notice this earlier. I would have brought it up with staff in terms of reviewing the materials, but within the legal realm, I think it's somewhat unusual to have just a completely open-ended absence of any statute of limitations. And I guess my concern, if I was in an agency's shoes, might be, what about 20 years ago or 30 years ago? And I guess I was just wondering if staff has addressed that issue. That's all. Thank you.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Torg. The proper statute of limitations for pension benefits is something that gets discussed occasionally. Should you use a trust limit? Should you use a contract limit? And that was actually brought up by House staff when they reviewed the bill. Should you use maybe a 3-year or a 4-year or a 6-year? Ultimately, though, when we talked about this with L&I, the burden of proof is on the member to meet the requirements to show that they're eligible. The longer they wait, the harder it is for them potentially to meet that benefit, but at least they would still have a shot. So L&I was felt like that was I don't want to put any words in their mouth, but they understood how that approach would work and didn't have any objections to it. that may be something that comes up in discussions with the legislature as the bill moves forward, whether they feel like some specified, there are none in pension benefits in general. So if I've got a pension and I forget about it until I'm 85 years old and I come back to DRS and say, hey, wait a minute, I worked for you guys, worked for the state. Did I get anything? And they would be like, well, actually, as a matter of fact, yes. So the fact that pension benefits in general don't have a statute of limitations, unless they're contested, and the fact that the burden of proof is still on the member is sort of where we ended up landing with no statute of limitations and why for this particular bill.
Thank you. I just want to make sure everything covered. It was just jumped out at me. So thank you.
Other comments or questions? Before us, we have a couple different options. Entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to endorse legislation option 2.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to adopt option number 2. Questions or comments? Seeing none, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Number 2 is adopted. Thank you very much.
I did want to jump in, Steve. We didn't talk about the procedure of this, but the friendly amendment question, do we do that after the first?
Yes,
motion?
I appreciate that. This is one of those benefits. The lump sum death benefit applies to all the plans, not left to. The bill only amends left to. During the course of discussing this with DRS and L&I, we actually asked the question and pointed out to them, this applies to all the other plans. Have you, by any chance, heard of other widows being denied in other plans for the same reason? And we got some mixed answers. I would say that my best understanding at this point in time is that there are none, but it is entirely possible when session comes around that there will be someone in the legislature would suggest an amendment to apply to all the other plans. In the past, I've checked in with you guys to get your direction on how you would like me to testify in those cases as to whether or not you would consider an amendment to apply this to all the other plans to be a friendly amendment or not. So that's a question I'm asking you guys for direction on.
I think it's friendly. It's not going to change our position, our language, our intent, just adding others. Simple enough. Tor, you okay with that? As long as you're okay, I'm okay, Tor.
I'm just fine.
Yeah, gotta make sure. All right. Awesome. All right. Item number 6. It looks like it's Jacob as well.
You want to introduce one, Steve, or let me jump in?
Sorry. Yes, this one was, you guys as a board discussed this a bit last year in a different context, and then it kind of spilled over. Once you understood the broader reason for some of the overpayments, the issue became kind of the responsibility for handling those overpayments. You've worked on it. It was on the work plan all interim long, and you made a motion to bring a final proposal to December earlier this year, I think at the September meeting. So with that, I will turn it over to Jacob.
Okay. I'll keep this one brief because you've been hearing me talk about it for a couple of years now. Like Steve said, the issue is when employers make an error that causes a retiree to receive an overpayment, the member is currently responsible for paying back that overpayment that they incorrectly received. Issue history was that there was an initial briefing in July, comprehensive briefing in September, and at that time the board requested a final briefing on a policy option that would shift that overpayment responsibility to the employer and shorten the statute of limitations for collecting that overpayment going back from 3 years to 1 year. We had worked with DRS to get 5 years of data, and this is for left to only. Over that time, there were approximately 30 overpayments, or no, there was approximately 30 corrected each year. The overpayments on average were corrected within 20 months of the original benefit calculation. And the average monthly benefit reduction was $62 per month after being recalculated. And so that was data that OSA used in their analysis, and then they also worked with DRS once again to get additional information. So OSA's analysis was that they expected to have no expected impact to Left 2 Trust Fund for shifting the overpayment responsibility, that the money's being paid back one way or the other. So it's the trust fund is taken care of there. However, changing the statute of limitations from 3 years to 1 year would have a impact. Over 25 years, the actuaries estimated that it would be approximately $1 million less that's recovered. However, this impact would not result in a supplemental contribution rate increase for this bill. As always, I've included the actuarial materials, including their assumptions and methods in the board materials. And I should add, I've not mentioned the actuaries are here today, so if there are any questions that you have for them, just let me know. So the next steps in front of the board today are option 1 would be to motion to endorse legislation making the employer responsible for the overpayments and shortening the statute of limitations from 3 years to 1 year. Also, if there's concern over that cost impact, option 2 would be to motion to endorse legislation to have employer responsible for the overpayments, but make no changes to the statute of limitations. And option 3 would be no action. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Questions? Thoughts? Anybody?
We did talk with DRS about this. They did request that the implementation date for the legislation be January of 2025.
Yes.
So that is what's in the bill draft.
Representative.
I guess I have kind of just want to clarify what we're talking about here. So if there was an overpayment of $20,000 over 3 years, and so 36 months in, there's a recalc, and it's found out there was a $20,000 overpayment over 3 years, so about $6,000 to $7,000 a year.
Yeah.
Currently, the employee would be responsible for paying back that whole $20,000.
Yes.
But not
Correct.
interest.
No interest.
Okay. The change would be it goes on to the employer now, but they'd only have to pay a third of that.
Correct. And the rest of it would be absorbed by the fund.
And so we did discuss in a previous presentation of just how DRS works with employers and to communicate these, and that the employers can go to DRS when because often these issues arise when there's maybe a change to collective bargaining agreements or some new type of pay, and the employer doesn't realize that it changes how they need to report it, so they go on reporting it, so that there could be things done by DRS and employers to kind of work together to identify these issues sooner so they don't go on for years.
So, Mr. Chair, Mark Johnston, can you hear me?
Again, Mark, welcome.
Yeah, so I'll make a motion for option 2. And I'll just say that if it's the employer's responsibility, then they should pay the whole freight.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'm not saying that there's anything nefarious that the employers are doing, but if it's their responsibility to make the member whole, then they should be doing that, and it shouldn't fall back to the fund to pay any of that money. That's my opinion.
Motion's been made for option number 2. Is there a second?
A question on
Go ahead.
motion number 1. So just to clarify the difference between motion 1 and motion 2, essentially they're the same, with motion 1 being changing that the limit statute or the statute of limitations, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Is there a benefit to option 1 over option 2 with that?
There's a benefit to the employers in using option 1 because their potential liability, if you will, is decreased. And again, they've got some expertise in reporting this, but things change as well. They've got access to DRS to help with questions, but the concern about the statute of limitations came from the fact that if something does unintentionally drag on, then yeah, it could have a significant impact, unexpected impact on a employer budget. And depending on the size of the employer, that could be not inconsequential. So that was the discussion when the board made the motion in September, was to bring back option 1.
Okay, just so, I mean, we have a motion. I guess if you have a question, I guess we can, for clarification, that would probably be appropriate, right, Tor? So we're not speaking on a motion that hasn't been seconded, so go ahead.
Let's see if my comments will fit within that framework. I guess maybe I'll just express my concern with option 2 from an employer's perspective. I think when we had this conversation, I think the employers would be concerned about long-term liability here without some statute here. And so, I'm not supportive of option 2 at this point in time. I would be supportive of option 1.
Okay. Back on the motion. Is there a second for the motion? All right, not seeing a second. Open up the discussion again for action. Jay?
I'd make a motion for option 1 to endorse legislation, make an employer responsible and shortening statute of limitations from 3 years to 1 year.
And I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded to adopt number 1. All right, open up for questions or comments on the motion. Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor of number 1, say aye.
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 Sorry, opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion passes. Thank you. Thanks for the conversation. Item number 7?
7.
Wow. Go ahead, Steve.
This is an issue that also was added to the board's work plan following legislation that didn't pass last session. It deals with kind of a rare circumstance where a condition is, for instance, PTSD from multiple exposures, was specifically excluded from being considered duty related for a period of time, and then was specifically included as being eligible to be duty related as a result of a legislative change. This bill would allow people who went out on a non-duty disability to reapply or to apply to have their benefit converted to a duty disability if they're if they're able to show that their condition is in fact, for instance, in this case, a result of PTSD from multiple exposures. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jacob.
Sorry
That may have been too much of an introduction.
No,
sorry about that.
Sorry for not jumping in on the last one, but on the last one, did we want to talk about friendly amendment to that one too? Because I think that one's, yeah.
I apologize. Yes, overpayments occur in all the plans, and they're all handled currently the same way, which is the member is responsible for the overpayment. There's some very limited circumstances, but this is also a proposal which I know the select committee has been tracking the board's work on this. During the interim, they decided not to do anything on the proposal, but there are a number of legislators who are looking to see if this bill would come out or not and what it looked like. So again, this is a possibility that the bill, there's an amendment to the bill during session to apply it to all the plans. And Jacob and I are kind of looking for some direction. If it applied to all the plans, would you consider that a friendly amendment or not?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Mark Johnston again.
Mark?
I think it should apply if that happens during the course of the legislative session. I think that it's a matter of equity and it should apply to all the plans, all the people in the plans as well. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Not seeing any objections, so I think we'll take that as friendly.
Thank you. I already did the intro on the disability, so it's yours.
Okay. So Steve covered the issue, and I'll go ahead and just jump to the history. So this was part of the DRS Ombuds bill last session, but it is an issue that we've had ongoing discussions with DRS about over the years. There was an initial briefing in September to the board, and then a comprehensive briefing last month, where the board requested a final briefing on a policy option to have DRS review non-duty disability retirements with a disabling condition of PTSD that was not eligible for duty disability at the time of retirement, but has since become eligible for duty disability. And then it goes on from there. But I just wanted to read that part because we were very specific in drafting this and in the discussions with the board to help alleviate any concerns that this may be more costly, that it may bring in unexpected members. And so in part, it's limited to those that have we've accomplished that hopefully in part by limiting it to those who were approved for non-duty disability. So I'll share some data as we go through this, but that is a much smaller subset of left to retirees. And then we've continued to work with DRS, and they've continued to review that subset to see who may qualify under this proposal. And I should add, this one was retroactive. And that the member, if a member did qualify under it, they would be paid retroactive to the effective date of that PTSD. When we say disabling condition, it's PTSD. So to the effective date of the change in the PTSD law, where it could come from multiple exposure instead of being limited to a single event exposure. Okay, I guess I just talked about all that. So yeah, skip through that. And then the data with DRS. So that subset I talked about, there were 56 left to non-duty disability retirees prior to the effective date of that change in the PTSD law. So we knew that at a maximum, and obviously not all 56 were going to be PTSD from multiple exposure, but we could at least start with that subset. And then on an initial review, DRS identified 4 who may have suffered from PTSD. They've continued to look at those, and they believe there's 2. But it would really be up to the way this bill's written for the members have to contact DRS and reapply. So there could still be more, but that's just an initial review that DRS has done. They have not gone through all the medical history of all of the 56 to verify that. So DRS and OSA work together to price this proposal. There you can see the dollar impact on the present value of future benefits, and then the impact on contribution rates. The actuaries assume that all 4 of those retirees would be reclassified. Just from the discussions with DRS, I believe it's unlikely that all 4 would be, but that's at least the assumption they're working off of, and that they would go from non-duty to duty, not non-duty to catastrophic. There are at least 2, I believe, members who have qualified for catastrophic disability with PTSD, but it is rare. And then this rate impact would not result in a supplemental rate impact to the plan. So next steps for the board, option 1 would be to motion to endorse the legislation, and option 2 would be to take no action. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I don't know if this is splitting hairs or not, but being that we're utilizing the acronym PTSD, there's also another acronym that is being used by the medical community, which is PTSI, and basically post-traumatic stress disorder versus post-traumatic stress injury. The difference being an injury typically can be recoverable. So I just wanted to note that, being that the language we're using today is PTSD, but largely depending on what you're reading, it may also say PTSI.
Okay.
So I don't know if that is included in the bill language or not, but it may be something we need to consider.
Yeah, I'll double check that. I know that I heard that going to different member groups this summer, that I kept hearing PTSI used instead of PTSD. So I will at least verify that that is whether that needs to be included in the legislation or not.
It may, like I said, maybe splitting hairs and people consider it the same, but I would hate for we to get down the road and say, well, you actually have PTSI. That's different than PT, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Which I know can sound preposterous, but stranger things have happened. So.
No, it's a fair question. PTSD from a single event is something that was potentially considered a duty-related injury even prior to any legislative change. And there was very rare, but there were some instances of a member being approved for workers' comp as a result of PTSD from a single exposure, a single event. The legislative change recognized the fact that in addition to this traumatic injury that might occur in one event, you could also have something more in the nature of an occupational illness as a result of multiple exposures. And that's where I think the PTSD part came in. We'll double check, but I'm confident that the way the bill is written, it'll cover both instances, and we'll let you know if that's not the case.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.
All right, before us, we have options number 1 or number 2. Is there a direction?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I make a motion to adopt option 1 to endorse legislation.
Okay.
And I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded to adopt number 1, motion to endorse legislation. Comments or questions? Hearing or seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you, Jacob. I think you get a break for one.
I do.
When the board had a discussion about succession planning at your October strategic planning meeting, there was consensus by the board to explore a couple of different issues related to how salaries are set currently for board employees. And Karen gave you a follow-up presentation on that in the November meeting, and you asked for a final presentation at this December meeting. And so with that, I will turn it over to Karen.
Thank you. This is Jacob's intermission, so he gets a little rest. Good morning, Chair Lawson and members of the board. For the record, Karen Durant, staff to the board. At our last board meeting, we discussed staff salaries and the Washington Management Service salary structure. You expressed interest in having options for the board to have authority to set salaries in support of your fiduciary responsibilities. Okay, there we go. Today, we are looking at two options. Policy option 1 would be to keep salary setting within the current Washington Management Service salary structure and civil service rule provisions. It would allow the board to have authority to evaluate and band the positions rather than that being centralized at the Department of Enterprise Services. The board would also have the authority to grant exceptions to the band maximums. As we discussed in our last meeting, the authority currently rests solely with the director of OFM. Pros and cons. The pros, it utilizes the similar WMS process. It would allow the board slightly more flexibility in setting salaries to support fiduciary responsibilities. And if exceptions are warranted and needed, it streamlines the approval process. The cons, legislation would be required. Salary setting restrictions would be with band maximums, and it may have unintended consequences across state service. Policy option 2, the board provides full salary setting authority with notification requirements to OFM and the legislature. Pros, the board would have full authority for setting salaries in support of fiduciary responsibilities. It allows for most flexibility for future succession planning, similar to OFM and legislative staff. The structure would be more consistent with similarly situated boards like Washington State Investment Board. The con is legislation is still required. Next steps. 3 options, a motion for policy option 1, a motion option for policy 2, or no action. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Sorry, let me get back to my slide. For those not familiar, can you kind of describe WMS and how that either applies or doesn't apply?
So currently, as we discussed in our last board meeting, 6 of the 8 staff are Washington Management Service employees. That is kind of a hybrid classified service with a lot of flexibility in salary setting and kind of management authority. The compensation structure is set in broad salary bands. Evaluation for positions and placement in bands is decentralized. Larger agencies have their own committees that evaluate the positions, place them in the bands. The bands themselves, the structure is, the authority for that is Office of Financial Management. And any exceptions to the banding has to be approved by the director of the Department of Financial Management. Is that enough?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Question? Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to our prior conversation on this, I think part of the reason we're having this conversation, and I'm glad the WMS question got raised, because part of the reason we're having this conversation is the WMS band in and of itself hasn't been salary surveyed in a considerable amount of time. And the risk that we have as employers of staff to the left board is we risk falling out of balance and losing really talented staff because of that. So for those reasons, I think I expressed this at the last meeting, but I'm really supportive of option 2 here. I think we need some authority and flexibility to manage the staff appropriately in terms of their salaries so we can remain competitive. It helps with our succession planning goals, and I think gives us the most flexibility. And I think the other reason too, I think this applies to us, is that we're not subject to the general fund. We are supporting these positions with the left fund. And so for those reasons, again, I support option 2.
Help me out.
Matter of procedure.
Is Mark?
Hold on, Mark.
Jim?
Hold on. Go ahead, Jay. I think you're going to help me with that.
I would make a motion for policy option 2.
There we go. All right.
Second.
Second.
All right, Mark, thank you. Figured that's what you were looking to do. So before us, we have a motion that's been made and seconded to adopt motion number 2. Open up for comments and questions. Mark, did you have something?
I just say that I couldn't agree more with the employer representative from Olympia.
Well noted. Any other comments? All right. Before us is option number 2. All those in favor saying aye.
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 Yeah. Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes, number 2. Thank you, Karen. We have, I think we can go for a few more minutes. Lunch is ready, but we can finish this one probably too, our next one.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Item number 9.
This also ended up on the board's interim work plan as a result, or as spinning out of the DRS ombuds bill from last session. There was a motion earlier in the year to bring this back for a comprehensive report, and that is what Jacob is here to present to you right now.
Okay, so this one you can see from the giant block of words there from under the issue statement has changed. It's been a bit of a journey. I think my last presentation was a bit confusing because I started off with what the initial issue was thought to be, explaining that, and then getting through kind of this path we went on to figure out what was actually going on. So I'm going to try to do that much briefer this time. But where this issue is kind of born out of is that situations where a member is injured, either non-duty or duty, they use leave. They receive an insurance disability payment or an L&I payment, depending whether it was duty or non-duty. They buy back their leave from their employer with that insurance payment they've received. And so this is allowed through collective bargaining agreements. So we haven't done a survey or anything to know how common it is, but my understanding is it's pretty common. And in those collective bargaining agreements, it is typically mandatory that employees do this. My understanding of one of the policy reasons behind this is that it prevents an incentive to be out on disability, where an employee could be receiving their salary through leave and then also be receiving their salary or something approximating it through their insurance payments or their L&I payments. And so there was initially a thought that DRS was treating temporary non-duty and temporary duty disability leave inconsistent in these situations, where for duty, they were counting it as basic salary, but for non-duty, they were not. But as we dug into that, we realized that wasn't the case, but there still was an underlying issue there. So I'll get to that here, but it has to do with the requirements of purchasing service credit, that there's a different type of purchase service credit when you're out on duty disability versus the type of purchase service credit when you're out on non-duty. So as Steve said, the issue was in the DRS ombuds bill, and there was an initial briefing in September by the board. So quickly, just basic salary, paid leave is considered basic salary. Disability payments, workers' comp payments, private insurance payments are not basic salary. Already kind of explained the rest of that. So as I said, the issue really comes down to these differences in purchase service credit and how that's applied under the law. For duty disability, not going to go through all the detail of this slide, but the duty disability has different purchase service credit than non-duty. Because the person is injured, the employee is injured at work, the employer is on the hook for paying more of the purchase service credit when it is duty versus non-duty. On non-duty, the member pays for it. And then I do reference below here employer notice that gives options for how the employer treats the purchase of service credit when it's a duty disability purchase service credit, that the employer has a couple options. And that's where this issue kind of originated from, is for the member, it looks like their salary is just being counted when they're on duty disability, that when they buy it back, it's still going to their basic salary, but when they're on non-duty, all of a sudden they have to pay for it. See here. So the employer notice was really just giving procedural options for the employer and how they report the temporary duty disability purchase service credit. So here's where we get to the more specific issue, the authorized leave of absence law. So a break in service for a non-duty injury would fall under the what's called the ALOA, the Authorized Leave of Absence Purchase Service Credit Law. This applies to more situations than just non-duty injury. I know it's very commonly used when someone is out on maternity or paternity leave to purchase that time. They can purchase up to 24 months of service credit. But where this situation occurs is that it's only available to members who return to work after their leave of absence, not those who retire. So as you can imagine, someone could be out on a non-duty injury and then eventually not be able to return to work and have to retire, and they would not be eligible to purchase this service credit under the current law.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Now, usually though, when you do retire, aren't you eligible to purchase up to 5 years of service credit?
Yes, that
You can purchase they call it a purchase of service credit, but in that case, you're paying the full actuarial cost, not as in the case of an ALOA where you're paying the member and employer contributions plus interest.
Yeah, it's always confusing for those of us who work in pensions that it's called purchase service credit causes a lot of confusing because you're really purchasing an annuity with that at retirement versus this being your service credit. So the issue that this causes in this situation is that if the member retires and they don't return to work and they so normally if you retired, you could just take leave and you would still earn that service credit. But in this situation where these members have the collective bargaining agreement where they have to participate in the buyback, that makes that time ineligible as basic salary. So they would be able to purchase service credit, but they can't do that because they are retiring and not returning to work. So they're kind of caught in this catch-22 that they have to buy back that time, so it can't be counted as basic salary as leave, and they can't purchase the service credit. So they haven't been able to gather data on how many people this impacts, but we're able to drill down to what that specific issue is. Go and skip this one. We've talked about the differences in the two types of purchase service credit. And then policy option in front of the board would be to amend the authorized leave of absence law to allow members retiring immediately after being out on temporary non-duty disability to be eligible to purchase service credit. We only did an initial briefing on this, so this is really the comprehensive briefing in December, so there hasn't been time for the board to choose a policy option and go through the normal pricing, working with the actuaries and pricing that option prior to the December meeting. So the next steps for the board, option one would be a motion to consider the comprehensive report as the final proposal and endorse legislation on policy option one. Making that change to the ALOA law to allow people, members retiring to be eligible to purchase service credit. Option 2 would be motion to study this issue further next interim. And option 3 would be no action. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions? Seeing or hearing you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Mark,
I don't have, excuse me, I don't have a question, but I move for option number 2.
is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded for option number 2. Discussion.
Follow-up question for
Please,
Jacob. So I'm trying to just kind of clarify this in mind. So essentially what we're looking to do is offer the same opportunity for somebody who is out on non-duty to purchase service credits versus somebody that has an on-duty injury and purchasing service credits. Because as you mentioned and as Representative Burke was asked, purchasing service credits is exactly what you said. That's an annuity as opposed to purchasing your service credits in the sense of paying what you would have paid while you were, paying your normal contribution. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Except there still would be a difference in the two. That if it is a duty disability or duty injury, that the employer pays for that purchase service credit, and so we're not talking about changing that to where the employer pays the service credit or pays the contributions on a non-duty, right? But at least the person out on non-duty would be who retires would be eligible to purchase that.
To pay for both of those.
Yes,
Their contribution and the employer's contribution.
Yes.
Yeah. That being the main difference.
Well, all of that would be straightened out under option 2. All of that would be discussed by the board next interim. We'd have a chance to kind of simplify this issue, clarify the issue, work with the actuary on cost, explain the pricing differences, and go into all of that next interim.
Perfect. Thank you.
Jason, on the motion, any other questions or comments? Seeing no other questions or comments, motion was made for number 2. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion 2 is adopted. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you. Next year I'll do a better job. I'll get this concise. I'll figure out how to explain this one clearly.
Jacob, number 10, month of death. Steve?
This was an issue that was brought to the board by the Department of Retirement Systems earlier this interim, and the board asked for a follow-up and for a final presentation to discuss the topic at this meeting. With that, I will turn it over to Jacob. You good?
Yeah. Okay. So the issue in front of the board today is in the month a retiree or survivor passes away, the last month benefit payment is prorated based on the number of days that person was alive in the month. Frequently, this results in an overpayment and an invoice being sent to the family or estate to collect any amount that should have been prorated. I know there were some questions from the board last month when DRS was speaking on the issue, and I believe they followed up with an email answering at least some of those questions. But if you have any more, please let me know. So issue history: in 2018, DRS requested the board and select committee endorse legislation to pay the full month of death payment, and the board and select committee did endorse that, but it failed to pass. In 2019, the board received a follow-up briefing on the issue, but did not pursue legislation. And then, as Steve said, this year, DRS requested the board, the select committee, and the governor's office endorse legislation. The select committee has endorsed legislation, and then DRS did just hear back from the governor's office, and so that is going to be included in the governor's budget. So some of the policy considerations here were that it was a burden for grieving families, does not eliminate all overpayments caused by month of death issue though. So going back through those presentations from the previous years reminded me of that, and so I'll get into some data about that just so the board knows that there will still be people impacted by the month of death issue. or I guess not by the month of death, but that will still receive overpayments when it takes more than 1 month for DRS to receive notification of the death. And then there were some administrative costs. There were not large savings for DRS in the previous fiscal note by not having to do this anymore. And then also I think I have another slide on this, but it did cause some issues with insurance premiums, and I did include in the board materials a letter we received in a previous year, I think 2019 or 2018, from Healthcare Authority explaining some of those issues. So some data, this is back in 2018, did not ask for updated data, but there were 37 Left 2 members who died in that time. In that year, 9 members had overpayments caused by month of death, and only 1 member had an overpayment that would have been eliminated by this proposal. So did not get, like I said, did not get updated data. Yeah, that's changed in recent years. And I should, once again, when I say one would have been eliminated, it would have impacted all 9, but would have just eliminated it for the 1. And then here are the, so we did ask the actuaries for pricing on this, and they referred to the 2019 fiscal note. So here you can see the contribution rate impact. I know there was some discussion of this last month with DRS, that it's a 3 basis point impact for employees, and then 2 for employer, 1 for state. Won't go through all of the PEB impacts. Like I said, I included their materials. They were in favor of this bill. They provided testimony at the select committee, and are supporting the proposal. So the next steps for the board, option 1 would be to endorse legislation. This option provides, the legislation we discussed. And then option 2, instead of endorsing it, the board has done this previously, can direct Left 2 board staff to sign in and testify in support of the legislation at legislative committee hearings during session. And then option 3 would be no action. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Questions or comments on the presentation? Thoughts, direction?
Mr.
Go ahead, Mark.
So I would love to support the SCPP's support of that legislation. I think it's most appropriate for option 2 for us. I think we should all be in support of that, but it's great to get behind our brothers and sisters on the select committee on pension policy after all these years. I think that they have a unique standing in the legislature, and I think it would be great for us to support them.
Yeah.
Is that a motion, Mark?
Is that a motion, Mark?
Sorry, yes, I'm sorry. Thanks for the reminder. Yes, I motion move option 2.
All right,
I
thank you,
second.
buddy. Motion's made and seconded. Discussion, further discussion, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of option number 2, say aye.
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 Opposed? Option 2 is adopted. Thank you very much, Jacob. Yeah. Get her.
Okay. The DRS appeals deadline, this is also an issue that spun out of the ombudsman bill. There was it was on the board's work plan, and you've made a motion for a final proposal at the December meeting, and here to make that presentation is Jacob.
Okay. Last one of the year. Okay, the issue is that some Left 2 members have missed their deadline to file an administrative appeal with DRS and express concerns regarding a lack of clarity on the deadlines for filing that appeal. So Steve covered the history here. At the November meeting, the board requested a final briefing on requiring tolling. So that was when DRS requested more information from the member, that would toll their deadline to file an appeal, because there had been at least one member where there had been confusion on that, where they had been asked to provide more records and thought they had more time to do so, and then were said that they were untimely with filing their appeal. And then the second part of that is to extend the time to file an appeal to 120 days. And so that would mirror the petitions process. So we talked about DRS having, as part of their APA process, having set up a petitions as an initial step, or I guess a secondary step. And then before going on to an appeal, and for petitions, they have 120 days. And so there was also some members that expressed confusion over that, having these two different timeframes. So the Administrative Procedures Act has a minimum of 20 days to file an appeal, but leaves it up to the agency to have more than 20 days and to put that into rule. However, the APA does not require tolling, and it does not require that petitions process. That's something that DRS has set up. So DRS's APA process, a member receives an initial decision from DRS. Also, this can impact employers. Same process for them. And then an administrative decision is that second step. And then it goes on to a petition decision, which has 120 days to file, and then a appeal of that decision, which currently has 60 days to file. So we got some data from DRS in the last 5 years. There have been 75 petitions, and 0 of those have been denied for not being timely. And there have been 37 appeals of petitions, and 2 of those have been denied for not being timely. We asked OSA to, or no, we did not. We did not request the pricing from OSA on this one. Just the number of requests we were making to OSA, and did not ask them to do a pricing on this one. However, they did complete a fiscal note for the DRS Ombuds bill, which I've included in the appendix to your materials. And within that, they said that they expect this change to result in an indeterminate cost to the retirement system, as refiled claims have the potential to result in pension benefit increases, but could not identify those costs. So the next steps in front of the board today are option 1 would be to motion to endorse legislation. This legislation would be for left-2 members to have 120 days to file an appeal for administrative decisions from DRS. DRS must provide written notice of the right to appeal and the deadline for filing the appeal. If DRS requests additional records from the member, they must toll the deadline for filing an appeal and provide in writing the updated deadline for filing that appeal. Option 2 would be no action. And then I forgot to include option 3, which would be to motion to study this issue further next interim, and to continue to work with, I think that would include to continue to work with DRS on other ways to resolve the issue.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions, comments on the presentation? What's the flavor?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion for option 3, further study on the issue. That's the option that Jacob mentioned there last.
I will second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded for the invisible number 3. Comments or questions on the motion? Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Jacob.
I got through them quick. Thank you.
Nice job. Very good. Mr. Nelson, number 12 on our list is the administrative update.
All right, I'll keep this especially brief since I know I'm between you and lunch. Reminder, legislative session begins the second Monday in January, which is January 8th, and it will end March 7th. During legislative session, we'll remind you that the board meetings are all hybrid and they're of a kind of a compressed agenda, which will just be an administrative update and a legislative update where we're tracking the board endorsed bills and any other bills that may be of interest to board members. The board meeting calendar that you approved at the last meeting will be sent out to all of you guys to get on your individual calendars for the upcoming year. The next board meeting is scheduled for January 24th at 9:30. And again, that'll be an abbreviated agenda. So if you're on at 9:40, you may have already missed the meeting. But that concludes my administrative update, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. I also want to acknowledge, I know we have some partners here in the room. I want to say thank you very much for your work. To Sean and Seth, I know we asked some tough questions last month, and I want to say I appreciate you coming back, showing up today. We do value the relationships with our stakeholders and all of the work that all of you do. Provide us great guidance, give us the information to make good decisions. So we're thankful for that. So thank you very much. So, all right, what we have not received any public comments that I believe. None. But we will be adjourning into executive session, and we will adjourn into executive session at let's go 11:50. That'll give time for people to grab some food, and then we will be in executive session for Karen. What do you think, Tim? 20 minutes. Okay. So if we will be coming back then at 12:10.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, the purpose of the executive session was to discuss the performance of a public employee.
Thank you, Tor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for keeping me online. I got it all wrote right here. I just kind of go off my own anyways, you know. All right, so from 11:50 to 12:10 will be an executive session. We don't envision no additional action to be taken following our executive session. So for those in the room who want to simply leave, thank you for being here, and happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all of that. So thank you. All right, we are back in our public meeting. We are had no action taken in executive session, nothing to report back to all of you. We at this point would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to adjourn our December meeting. Is there discussion? Anybody got questions? Thank you very much for that. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.